All right, let's jump into this deep dive. And wow, Al Capone, huh? You really went all out with these sources, FBI files, articles, even a clip from another podcast.
Yeah, it's quite the collection.
It is. Definitely sets us up to get past the, typical gangster stuff and really dig into who Capone was.
I think so, too. There's a lot here that goes beyond the legend, gets to the man himself.
Okay, so that's actually a perfect place to start. How does a kid from Brooklyn?
Well, that's the thing, right? It's almost like the classic rags to riches story, except maybe more like rags to infamy in his case.
Rags to infamy, I like that. So immigrant parents, Brooklyn, drops out of school young, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, running with street gangs early on.
Yeah.
But even in the FBI files, you see it, they mention his intelligence. Even then.
Not just a tough guy.
No, not at all. There's actually this story in one of the articles. Capone's a teenager, rival gang tries to ambush him.
Oh, wow.
And he uses a decoy, leads them off while he and his crew get away. Already thinking strategically.
Whoa. So that's, what, like pre-Prohibition?
Way before. This is like formative years stuff.
Okay, so then enter Johnny Torrio, professor of Underworld University. I love that the podcast called him that.
Right. Perfect title. Torrio's the one who really mentors Capone, shows him both sides, the violence you got to have and the business smarts to really succeed.
And they end up in Chicago, which, Chicago in the 20s, that's like gangster central.
Oh, absolutely. And when Torrio almost gets assassinated, that kind of sets the stage for Capone to take over.
All right, so here's where it gets wild. Prohibition. Like common sense says, you ban alcohol, LAA a crime. Right, not how it went down at all.
Nope. The 18th Amendment, great idea on paper, maybe, but what really did was create this huge black market, perfect for guys like Capone.
So it's like now instead of going to the bar, you're sneaking into speakeasies, drinking bathtub gin.
And making criminals rich. One of the articles compares it to, like, the Wild West. Fortunes made and lost overnight. And Capone, he's thriving in this environment.
The Chicago outfit. That's not even a gang anymore. That's like a corporation. Bootlegging, gambling, you name it, they controlled it.
And the money. We're talking billions in today's money, some of these sources say.
Wow. Okay, but to get that big, to stay on top,
he
was ruthless, right? Can't shy away from that.
Oh, absolutely not. And that brings us to, well, I think the event that really cemented his reputation, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre.
Yeah, reading those FBI reports, chilling. 7 of Moran's guys lined up, shot down by Capone's men dressed as police. Cold-blooded.
Totally calculated. The North Side gang, that was Moran's crew, they were the biggest competition. This wasn't just violence, it was a message.
Like, don't even think about messing with me kind of message. Man, Chicago must have been terrifying back then. But here's what gets me in the end. It wasn't the Tommy guns, wasn't the rival gangs. It was the IRS that got Capone.
Yeah.
Seriously.
It's almost funny, isn't it? This powerful gangster brought down by taxes.
The Leoness, the Untouchables, they were trying, right?
Oh, absolutely. They shut down breweries, disrupted things. But Capone was smart, always had layers between him and what was going on. Those FBI files, you can see it, they couldn't get anything solid on him directly.
So the Untouchables are the flashy ones, making the news.
Yeah.
While the IRS is quietly building their case.
That's it exactly. Special Agent Frank Wilson, he's the guy who really goes after the finances. Years of work, just poring over records, following the money. And what they find? Tax evasion. Big time.
Wow. So the empire built on illegal booze, gambling, violence.
Yeah.
All brought down by not paying taxes.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? If Capone had focused that brain of his on legitimate business, he could have been incredibly successful.
Good question. But I guess some people, they just can't resist the allure of the underworld, huh? Capone's story just keeps captivating people, even all these years later.
There's just something about his rise and fall, the glamour, the brutality, that really grabs hold of the imagination, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And the thing is, we haven't even touched on his reputation as, like, a folk hero almost, helping the poor during the Depression. It's such a contradiction.
Right. It's all part of what makes his story so interesting. And to really understand it, I think we got to dig into the St. Valentine's Day Massacre a little deeper. Because even though Capone wasn't there.
Oh, yeah. He was conveniently on vacation in Florida, right?
Exactly. But you can't deny that event was classic Capone. His fingerprints are all over it. It shows us a lot about how he thought, how far he was willing to go.
Okay, yeah, let's get into that next. I have a feeling this downfall by taxes thing, maybe it's not as ironic as it seems at first glance. Like maybe there's a deeper lesson there about power, about how even someone like Capone, who thought he was untouchable, could be brought down. What do you think?
That's a great point to keep in mind as we dig in. Because as we'll see, even when you reach the top like Capone did, the fall can be pretty dramatic. I mean, talk about a turning point, right? The St. Valentine's Day Massacre, it really cemented Capone's image as this like utterly ruthless, cold, calculating guy.
It did, didn't it? I mean, to pull a stunt like your guys dressed as cops, taking out your rivals in cold blood, that takes some serious guts.
Oh, absolutely. But it wasn't just about the guts, was it? It was the message it sent.
Yeah, way beyond those 7 guys who were killed that day.
Exactly. It was like Capone was saying, look, I control this town, and anyone who gets in my way, this is what happens.
It's crazy how much fear he instilled, isn't it? I read this quote in one of the articles. Some guy in Chicago at the time said, you couldn't even say Capone's name in public. You'd whisper it like he was a ghost, always watching.
That's wild. But that fear, that's what let him operate the way he did. Nobody dared to cross him.
Okay, but it also made him a target, right?
Yeah.
The bigger you get, the more people want to take you down.
You got it. And that's where Eliot Ness and the Untouchables come in. They were handpicked, specifically to go after Capone. The feds were done messing around.
And they did make a dent, right? Shutting down some breweries and stuff. But reading those FBI files, it seems like Capone himself was always a step ahead.
Oh, he was smart. Always kept himself distanced from the actual crimes. Plausible deniability, they call it.
And a whole team of lawyers ready to go. So while Ness and his guys are making headlines,
the IRS is doing the real detective work.
Quietly.
Meticulously.
Yeah. Special Agent Frank Wilson, he's the guy leading the charge. They spent years going over Capone's finances, following the money, and that's what did him in.
Taxes. It almost seems too simple, right? This guy, all the violence, the power, and it's taxers that take him down.
It's a good reminder, isn't it? Nobody's above the law.
Absolutely. It's like a real-life crime drama, only the weapon isn't a gun, it's a calculator. And it wasn't some big shootout. It was this slow, steady unraveling as the IRS built their case. Exactly. And when it finally happens, 1931, Capone's charged, convicted, not for murder, not for bootlegging, tax evasion. 11 years in federal prison. That was it for his reign over Chicago.
Wow. So from king of the underworld to a prison cell.
Yeah.
Quite a fall. But even in his decline, there's something about Capone that's just not compelling.
Yeah.
There. He wasn't just some, one-dimensional bad guy.
Right. The sources show this more complex picture. Ruthless, yeah, and also generous, capable of terrible things, but also surprising acts of kindness.
It's that Robin Hood image, right? Stealing from the rich, helping the poor. But with Capone, it was never clear-cut.
Never. Was he really helping people out of the goodness of his heart, or was it all calculated just to make himself look better? Who knows?
We probably never will. But that's part of what makes his story so interesting. That mix of good and bad, that gray area. He was a product of his time, sure, but he also shaped that time, left his mark on history.
And it makes you think, doesn't it? Was he just a symptom of a corrupt system? Or did he help create that corruption?
That's a really good question. It's one that people still debate today. But before we get too far into Capone's legacy, I think we got to look at the man himself. Not the gangster, not the myth. The actual human being.
Totally. Because he wasn't just Al Capone, public enemy number one. He was also a husband, a father, a person with fears, with hopes. Understanding that side of him might be the key to understanding his legacy.
It's kind of wild how much we're still talking about Capone.
Yeah.
Like all these years later, and there's still movies, books, podcasts.
Yeah.
It's like he's never really gone away.
I know, right? He's become this larger-than-life figure, almost like a mythical character in some ways.
And I think it's that push and pull, the ruthless gangster, Scarface, all that.
Yeah.
But then you hear about him being generous, helping the poor, devoted to his family. It's almost like there were 2 Capones.
Yeah, the sources really show that. Like, one minute he's charming, the next he's ice cold. And those acts of charity, they help people, sure, but
there was always an angle, right?
Yeah. It's hard to say for sure. I mean, he definitely knew how to play the game, use his money to make himself look good,
Like a PR stunt almost.
Exactly. But I don't think it was all fake. Some of the sources talk about how Capone grew up poor himself. He knew what it was like to struggle.
Huh. That's interesting. So maybe there's some genuine empathy in there alongside the calculated stuff.
I think so. It reminds us that even a guy like Capone, he was still human, had his own reasons, his own feelings.
That's what keeps his story so fascinating, isn't it? That we're still trying to figure him out. Was he a monster? Was he misunderstood? It makes you think.
Yeah, it does. Can you separate the man from the myth? Can you acknowledge the terrible things he did, but also see the complexity of who he was?
It's a tough one. And honestly, I think it's up to each person to decide how they see him. But one thing's for sure, his story is a cautionary tale about power, about greed, about how trying to control people's behavior can backfire big time.
And it reminds us that history is never simple. It's messy, it's full of contradictions. And to understand it, you got to look at all L sides, even the dark ones.
Well said. We really did go deep on Capone, huh? His rise, his fall, the good, the bad, the whole picture. We looked at Prohibition, the violence, how it all came crashing down because of taxes.
It was quite the journey. And we learned a lot along the way, I think.
And all from the sources you gave us. It's like we all went on this deep dive together.
That's what makes it so great. It's a shared exploration, uncovering these hidden truths, challenging what we thought we knew.
So to you listening, thank you for coming along on this deep dive into the world of Al Capone. We hope you found it insightful and thought-provoking and, well, maybe just a little bit entertaining too.
And remember, this is just one story. There's so many more out there waiting to be explored. Keep those sources coming, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.